Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Kretzenbacher and I'm the President of Liberty Victoria. Welcome to tonight's Liberty Victoria Human Rights Awards. And thanks all for tuning in and attending. Before we start tonight, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm currently in Kurnu, which is the traditional name of Barwon Heads, and I'm on the lands of the Wadawurrung Barwon people of the Bardwood clan of the Wattung people. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I acknowledge that Aboriginal sovereignty over First Nations land was never ceded, and that Australia always was and always will be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land. And I would like to welcome tonight Auntie Georgina Nicholson, who's a Wurundjeri elder who has shared her time tonight to do a welcome to country. So thank you, Auntie Georgina. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Julia. Hello, everyone. My name is Georgina Nicholson and I am a proud Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung woman. Wurundjeri being part of the Kulin Nation. The Kulin Nation consists of 5 clans and they are Wurundjeri, Boonwurrung, Wathaurong, Tanarong and Dhadjowa. Wurundjeri being all of Melbourne CBD and surrounding country, extending north to the Great Dividing Range, east to Mount Baw, south to Mordialloc Creek and west to the mouth of Werribee River. So I would like to acknowledge and pay my respect to our ancestors who walked and lived on this land as free spirits for millennia. I would also like to acknowledge all Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people who are online with us this evening. And I would like to acknowledge all the traditional lands that you're all coming in, meeting from. And I'd like to pay my respect to all the traditional owners and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, yeah. I would also like to just say that I'm pleased to be doing the Welcome to Country for Liberty Victoria this evening. It's great that you're having this online. Better than nothing, isn't it? So it's for the Voltaire Human Rights Awards. So that sounds pretty exciting. It sounds like people have been very busy doing lots of work. So congratulations to the recipients. I'd also like to acknowledge the President of Liberty Victoria, Julia Kretzenbacher. I hope I said that right. I've been practicing. And any other executives that might be online with us this evening. I acknowledge you also. For those of you tuning in from Wurundjeri country, I would like to say to you, Womanjika Wurundjeri Balak, Yemen Kundibik. So I would just like to tell you what I've said in our Woi-wurrung language, and that is welcome to the land of the Wurundjeri people. So for the people that are tuning in from lands across Australia and maybe someone from Papua New Guinea, I believe, welcome. Gee, Papua New Guinea, that's a long way. So welcome, and I would like to acknowledge all the lands that you're on this evening and pay my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and to the traditional owners on the lands on which you're listening from. As we navigate our way through this COVID-19 pandemic, I reflect on the legacy of those who have come before me. I reflect on the long, unbroken, strong line of Aboriginal women and men that I come from, and I do draw strength from them. I think about the challenges they must have faced and still do now. But, you know, talking about our ancestors, the challenges they face is just, just unbelievable. My mother, Martha Margaret Nicholson, nee Terrick, was delivered by her grandmother, Granny Jemima, and that was on Corrandirk Aboriginal Mission near the present-day town of Healesville. So Granny Jemima was already teaching our mother the importance of caring for one another, of caring for country and being on country. And yeah, I think that's pretty amazing. When I share this story with you, I think you will be amazed by it also. Sorry, I've just got a couple of notes here that I'm making sure that I'm not going to forget anything. So, you know, the importance of family and culture and connection to country, and caring for one another, that's, you know, important stuff. So years later, our mother met a deadly Irish man called Patrick, and they met on a blind date in Melbourne in the early 1930s. In 1937, Mummy and Daddy were married, and back then it was in a registry office, and they had 16 children. 8 girls, 8 boys, all single babies, no twins, so no cheating, LOL. The oldest in my family is Auntie Pat Ockwell, and I'm the youngest. So, Sister Pat is an amazing senior elder who has made a lifelong commitment to her people, to her community, for she turned 83 last year, and for an Aboriginal woman to reach that age is a real milestone. For they say Aboriginal people don't live as long as other cultures. There's about a 12 to 15 year gap there, and that's a huge gap for our people, and we do have too much sorry business in our Aboriginal families and communities. So, you know, we must carry on the culture for our people as my ancestors did, and as my mother and her mother and her mother and so on have done for us. I can sit here tonight and do the Welcome to Country for being a Wurundjeri elder because of my mother. She gave me the birthright and she gave me the honour to do this. And I feel I don't have my parents around anymore. They're both passed away, and there's only 8 of us kids alive. So we've been through a lot, you know. I don't know if you've heard of William Barrack. Perhaps you have, but his sister Annie Barrack, they're my direct bloodline. So one tradition being our Wurrung language, it's part of our rich, deep heritage. And I like to say that our language has been sleeping and now we're waking it up, because we have to learn our language again, because, you know, back in the day, we weren't allowed to speak our language and practice culture. So that was stripped from us also. So we're learning our language. I think language is very important to know, you know, how to speak it and what the meanings are. So doing that at the moment and keeping us very busy. So some of the ways we do keep the culture alive is through song and dance and performances. So the coronavirus pandemic has changed the world in ways we would never have imagined, and the implications for our community have been profound for our health, our well-being and our jobs. But in many ways, this event online this evening has brought into focus the importance of relationships with family and connecting with one another as a community. I think we really do crave and need connection as people. It has been a very mentally challenging time and quite a lonely time for me also, because I live on my own, although I've got my son living with me at the moment, and I keep looking at the door thinking he's going to walk in any minute. But yeah, but I've been on my own most of the COVID lockdown stuff, because I think Victoria has been hit pretty hard over, like, you know, lockdown over a year all up sort of thing. So we've just come out of the 5th lockdown with restrictions still, but, you know, I believe if we all follow our leader, we'll get there. For people from other countries, I know yous are doing it hard, and I know there's been lots of deaths everywhere. So my heart goes out to all you people, but try to just do the right thing so everyone can come out of these lockdowns. It's just horrible. Never experienced anything like this before. I don't think it'll ever be the same again. Aboriginal culture is the oldest living, continuing culture there is. It dates back to 80,000 years plus. It is an ancient history. Aboriginal people, we do know about resilience and solidarity, and connection to land is very important. So I believe we are the sovereign owners of Australia, and there have been no treaties with us up to date. So we do have First Peoples Assemblies happening in Victoria now, so that's kicking off slowly, but it'll get there. So that's a good thing. So we have never ceded our sovereignty either. So that's another traumatised thing we have to deal with. So please respect. Wurundjeri people would like to ask you to respect the land, the waters, the flora and the fauna, because it's all important, and respect each other, and let's, walk together forward and make the world a better place. So thank you very much for having me. Please take care and stay safe. And I must say, with the Olympics, go the Aussies. They're doing so well. It's a great time to have the awards night too. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Auntie Georgina. It's a real honour to have you do the Welcome to Country. And you mentioned your connection to both Corranderk and William Barak. And when we talk about human rights advocates and people that fight and have fought for the liberties, Corranderk and William Barak were, well, the people of Corranderk, but also William Barak himself, they were really one of the most prominent human rights advocates earlier last century. And for everyone who's in attendance tonight, I encourage you all to read up on William Barak and Corranderk, because the history and the struggle of those people is absolutely amazing, and they changed a lot for people in very difficult circumstances. Yes, so thank you so much, Auntie Georgina, for that Welcome to Country. Thanks everyone for being here tonight for the 2021 Liberty Victoria Human Rights Awards. It's a real honour to have everyone here tonight, and sadly for the second year in a row, it's not an in-person event, but it's probably something that we're all a little bit used to now as this pandemic goes on. Over the past 18 months, it's probably a bit trite to say that this has been an unprecedented time and a difficult time for everyone. The pandemic has thrown up pretty significant and complex issues for a lot of people, including issues that affect civil liberties and human rights. This year and last year, throughout the pandemic, Liberty Victoria has continued to focus on the impact of COVID-19 on human rights and how best to strike the balance between human rights and public health. Liberty Victoria has always been supportive of public health measures that are there to protect everyone, although we have spoken out on some issues that concern human rights. Some things that we spoke about more recently are privacy concerns about QR codes and whether or not that should be made available to police. We don't think that it should be. The over-reliance on policing in managing the pandemic rather than a public health response, and that policing disproportionately affects more vulnerable people, and also restrictions on Australian citizens who wish to return home. So they're issues that we have spoken up about and will continue to speak up about. Over the past year, we've also continued making submissions and giving evidence of different inquiries. Some have been in respect of COVID-19, but others have been in respect of criminal justice issues, LGBTQIA+ issues, asylum seeker and refugee issues, as well as privacy issues. Some of the achievements over the past year, a pretty significant one has been the Victorian Spent Conviction Scheme. So Liberty Victoria's Rights Advocacy Project, as well as a number of other human rights and advocacy organisations, have been advocating for a spent conviction scheme for a number of years. And I'm sure there are many present tonight who partook in that advocacy. And finally, this year in February, that legislation passed, and it will start in December of this year. And Victoria has finally joined the rest of Australia in having a spent conviction scheme, which is something that's been really significant and will make a huge difference to people's lives. We've also continued to work on responding to and advocating about issues that affect criminal justice, including bail reform and raising the age of criminal responsibility. For our refugee and asylum seeker working group, they have spoken out about and done submissions on issues that adversely affect people who have sought asylum or who are seeking asylum, or who are in immigration detention facilities. So visa classes and family and partner reunions has been a topic that our asylum seeker and refugee group has been doing a lot of work on, calling for fairer and more transparent bridging visas, and also advocacy around the attempted prohibition of mobile phones in detention last year, which very gladly that legislation didn't go through, and asylum seekers and refugees and those in immigration detention can still have mobile phones, which is quite significant. Our government regulation and equality group has also been active over the past year and have drafted a number of really important submissions, including on electoral legislation reform, to ensure that charity groups and non-government organisations can speak freely on political issues, and they've also done a great submission on anti-vilification protections. Our privacy working group has been really active in advocating for people's privacy issues, including submissions and evidence being given on the use of third-party QR apps last year throughout the pandemic, and the issues that may cause with the privacy of data, the privatisation of Vic roads, as well as the impact on technology, the impact of technology on human rights. Now, our submissions and media releases and the work that we've done can all be found on our website. So if you check it out, you'll see the work that has been happening over the past year and a bit. We're here tonight, of course, for the Voltaire Human Rights Awards. These awards have been awarded for a number of years, and they honour persons or a group of people who have made outstanding contributions to human rights, including free speech, civil liberties, with a particular emphasis on progressing freedom, respect, equality, dignity and action. Past recipients of the Voltaire Human Rights Award include Dylan Alcott, Debbie Kilroy, Magda Juvansky and Dr. Gillian Triggs. Past recipients of the Young Voltaire Human Rights Award include Duan Hewson, the Nagaji Project led by Anna Chiretto and Indi Clark, Yasmin Abdel-Magid and Georgie Stone. And past recipients of the Empty Chair Award include Baruz Bushani, Ali Durrani, also known as Eating Fish, Witness J and Bernard Colery and Nazrin Sujade. Now, while the name Voltaire is used for these awards, we acknowledge his contribution to the modern construction of freedom of speech, but there are values and ideas that Voltaire espoused which Liberty Victoria does not share. Having said that, we're gathered here to celebrate some extraordinary individuals and groups of people for their contributions to human rights, freedom, respect, equality and dignity by awarding them with the Voltaire Human Rights Awards. Now, tonight is a webinar. It's also a fundraiser for Liberty Victoria. We usually hold a fundraising dinner, which I know that many of you have attended in the past, but of course, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we can't do that this year in person, and we weren't able to do that last year. Thank you to everyone who's here tonight and for those who have donated and attended as well. If you're able to donate, we would appreciate any amount that you're able to give to Liberty Victoria to help us continue our work. And you can do that through our website, or Grace will pop a link into the chat function as well, as the email that was sent to you has a link to that as well. Now, I'm going to begin by introducing the Young Voltaire Human Rights Award. The Young Voltaire Human Rights Award honours a person or a group of people no older than 30 at the time of their nomination for an outstanding contribution to action on free speech, human rights or civil liberties, with a particular emphasis on progressing freedom, respect, equality and dignity. It celebrates those who speak out, who write, campaign, whistleblow, take action or stand against authoritarianism. It gives me a great pleasure to announce that Mohamed Semra, who's present tonight, is the winner of Liberty Victoria's Young Voltaire Human Rights Award. Many of you might have heard of Mohamed Semra previously. In 2015, when Mohamed was a school student, he was with 6 of his friends at the High Point Shopping Centre and at the Apple store there. Mohamed and his friends were racially profiled by security guards at the Apple store, accused of being thieves based solely on the colour of their skin. This incident made international headlines after the encounter was filmed and it was made public what happened. Mohamed and his classmates spoke out about the incident, which highlighted the injustice that occurred for them and for other people as well. Apple later publicly apologised for their treatment. Since that time, Mohamed has been an active human rights advocate and continued working in social justice and community activities. In 2019, he established Endeavour Youth Australia, which aims to identify and invest in diverse leaders. With Endeavour Youth, he has supported hundreds of young people to build their confidence, learn active citizenship and leadership skills. He's advocated for the increased cultural awareness amongst leaders as well, and he actively ensures that we have future decision makers that represent and reflect the people that they are serving. Mohamed is an exceptional advocate for young people and a worthy recipient of the Young Voltaire Human Rights Awards. Please join me in welcoming Mohamed and in congratulating him on receiving the Young Voltaire Human Rights Award.
Thank you very much, Julia. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and the Aboriginal elders of their communities who may be here today. The traditional owners of the land in which I meet is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I would also like to thank Liberty Victoria and Julia for their dedication to defending and expanding human rights and freedoms for everyone. I'm truly honored to receive this award and beyond grateful for the recognition. However, I think it's important that I state that I am a product of my environment. My activism and my organization, Endeavour Youth Australia, is a culmination of my lived experience and the lived experience of those around me when I was growing up. Just to give you guys a understanding of how I grew up when I was younger, I had a very severe stutter. So when I used to speak, my body used to rock, my head used to twitch, and my tongue will come out. It made it very hard for me to speak. I didn't present in class. I didn't read out loud. And for a very long time, I didn't do the things I wanted to do because I was afraid that people might laugh at me. People might prejudge me. And it did halt me and hinder me from a lot of the things that I wanted to do. So, and coupled with the bias, conscious and unconscious biases that I experienced in school and outside of school, it made it very difficult to succeed. And I was in that situation where I was just going to just give up, all right? If I didn't have the support, if I didn't have the tools to succeed, then there was nothing left for me. I was lucky when I was in year 9 that I had an English teacher that did invest in me. She identified that, okay, I was articulate. My English was at a high level. And she told me to join debating. And I was like, how can I join debating if I can't even speak properly? So what she did was she went and saw a speech therapist course for me to attend. The school paid for it. I went for 2 weeks and I learned how to speak from the very beginning. It was an intensive course from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And after I had returned to school from going to an intensive course, I had an epiphany. Now I had a second chance to do all the things that I couldn't do. Go into the leadership team, join debating, and be more active in my community. However, it was hard because I had gone through one barrier, which was my stutter. But then I came to realize who I was as a person, and that was an African Australian in a country dominated by whites. In the leadership team at my school, there was never a young person or a student from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, which made it very hard for me to enter that position because I didn't see myself, I didn't identify with with the whole, I guess, institution. And I did see my friends self-rejecting, right? So I saw that as a problem. I was like, the only way that I guess I can implement change if I was in a position to do so. So I went for the leadership team. And when I joined that year, I ended up getting school captain, and we went from having no Africans in the leadership team to having over 25. And that was the first time for me where I got to see the impact of taking a step, the impact of starting a precedent. Because sometimes it's hard to be the first because you don't know the reactions you're going to get. You don't know how people are going to receive you. That was, I guess, justification for me moving forward, like understanding, okay, then maybe you miss 100% of the shots you didn't take. Same thing with debating, right? I joined debating. Same thing as the leadership team. There was never anyone from a culturally linguistic diverse background. And once I joined, 6 months down, the whole team was now African. And for the first time in our school's history, we went undefeated. So just by taking a step in my school, I got to see, okay, I can change the world, even if it's only the world around me, right? It had such an impact on the school environment. I was in a position where I can give cultural awareness talks to teachers, where I can sit down with the principal and discuss the issues and situations that are happening at the school and outside of the school, and work with the school to try and build an environment of inclusiveness. So I guess what happened in Apryl, right? That was after I had gone to the speech therapist course, right? And then once Apryl occurred, it was okay. Like, the reason why we decided to record it was this is something that the African community experiences a lot, right? You walk into a store, you get followed. There's a preconceived idea about our behavior and intentions. And it needs to change, because we're perceived as aggressive, we're perceived as uneducated, we're perceived as violent. When I go out in public, I have to be extra friendly. I have to make sure I'm smiling all the time, because if I'm sad one day, or if I have a bad day, then someone else is going to feel uncomfortable. So I guess through Endeavour Youth Australia, what we're trying to do is change the narrative. And that all starts with schools. That all starts with building a safe environment where kids can come to school and not have to carry the excess luggage that their community does. And through mentoring, through opportunity, and through support, anyone can achieve great things. And I'm a product of that. I'm an example of that. And for me, I feel like it's very important that I'm now in a position to impact change. And if I have the opportunity to do so, then I feel obliged to do it. And I owe so much to my mother. She came to Australia from Sudan with 5 kids, single mother. She raised us with the notion that if you're ever in a position to help somebody, you're obliged to do so. And I have tried to live by that my whole life. So thank you very much for acknowledging the work that we do. There's still a lot more work to be done. And yeah, I'm beyond grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mohamed, and thank you so much for sharing your story and for being here tonight. It's amazing to see the work that you've done, and I feel very heartened because I think the future is in very good hands. It's in the hands of people like you, and I'm looking forward to possibly one day welcoming Prime Minister Mohamed Semra, because I see great things in your future, Mohamed. So thanks so much for being here, and congratulations again on the Young Voltaire Human Rights Award.
Thank you very much.
I'll now turn to introducing the Voltaire Human Rights Award. This is an award that honours a person or a group of people who've made an outstanding contribution to human rights, free speech or civil liberties, with a particular emphasis on progressing freedom, respect, equality, dignity and action. This year, the 2021 Voltaire Human Rights Award is being awarded to the children of Tanya Day, Belinda Day, Warren Day, Apryl Day and Kimberly Watson. Tanya Day was a proud Yorta Yorta woman who tragically died in custody after being arrested for public drunkenness. This year marks 40 years since the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. The Royal Commission made a number of recommendations to address deaths in custody, including abolishing public drunkenness laws around Australia. The children of Tanya Day, Belinda, Warren, Apryl and Kimberly have undertaken a sustained effort over a number of years to fight the injustice that their mother experienced, to highlight the inappropriateness of public drunkenness laws and to advocate for justice for First Nations people, especially those in custody. The advocacy work of the children of Tanya Day is an example of an extraordinary commitment to human rights. The family's sacrifice and effort at a time of great personal grief and their ongoing public advocacy to seek justice in relation to their mother's death has resulted in a community-wide benefit. Tanya Day's children have been instrumental in the abolishment of public drunkenness laws in Victoria. They, through their advocacy, have highlighted how inappropriate those laws were and how they disproportionately affected First Nations people. Through their calls for the abolishment of public drunkenness laws and for it to be replaced by a more compassionate public health response, the process is now being realised and it's going to save people's lives. The children of Tanya Day are continuing to fight for accountability for her tragic death. At the same time, they're using their profile to seek justice for other First Nations people. Apryl Day, who's present tonight, has been instrumental in founding the Dhadjowa Foundation, which has been established to advocate for families whose loved ones have died in custody and to provide a coordinated approach to assist families that have been affected by deaths in custody. So I'd ask everyone to please join me in welcoming Apryl Day tonight and congratulating the children of Tanya Day for the Voltaire Human Rights Award.
Thank you, Julia. Firstly, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we'll all be meeting on. I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present, and I would like to acknowledge all the mob that are signing on today while we accept these awards, and that our sovereignty was never ceded and always was and always will be Aboriginal land. On behalf of my family, I'd just like to say thank you for the recognition of our family-led advocacy and campaigning, which has resulted in the systemic change of the abolition of public drunkenness. We feel very humbled to be presented with the Voltaire Human Rights Award and know that our mum would be extremely proud of the things that we've been able to achieve in her name. As we've said before, we're only here because of tragic circumstances, and that no one should have to experience what our family has or what other, close to 500 Aboriginal families have experienced since the Royal Commission. Our mother should still be here with us today, and we should have never actually had to be recognised for such an award. We want to thank our family and friends and our Aboriginal community and allies for the ongoing support, both emotionally, financially and physically on the ground. We wouldn't have been able to achieve our goals. We thank the team at VALS, HRLC for playing an integral part in the decriminalisation. But most importantly, we thank our mum, Tanya Day, for embedding strength, pride and resilience within us. We are a reflection of our mum and will forever be proud of her. Our mum, Tanya Day, was a proud Yorta Yorta woman. She was a grandmother of 8, and she was well known for her bubbly personality and her love for cooking and, her flashy clothes, sparkly pink outfits, and, her showing up in high heels at her, granddaughter's 2nd birthday. So mum was well known within community for her love for her family and for her outspoken ways. She too would advocate for Aboriginal people that had died in custody. The circumstances around her death in 2017 is obviously extremely traumatic for us as a family, but as a whole of a nation. A lot of our Aboriginal communities feel one another's deaths very deeply, especially when they're in such traumatic circumstances. The way that mum was treated was extremely horrific, and no one should be treated the way that our mother was and have their basic human rights denied and their life taken due to being racially profiled. We found that racism and unconscious bias was deeply embedded within the interactions that our mum faced that day, and her case highlighted that even today in 2021, our people are still facing horrific and preventable deaths due to those in power ignoring that the systemic racism that is embedded within their systems that they still benefit from. Our family has been tirelessly campaigning for close to 3 years, and to have the Victorian government commit to the abolition of public drunkenness is truly a bittersweet moment. Our hope is that no one else has to endure the pain that we have, and that our people all over the nation are safe from being targeted for this discriminatory law. The Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody reached its 30th year anniversary, and that report reviewed 99 Black deaths in custody and produced 339 recommendations. And little of those have actually been implemented, and the ones that have been are not meaningful and they have been defunded. public intoxication was actually one of those recommendations, and our Uncle Harrison Day also died in police custody after being arrested for an unpaid $10 fine for public drunkenness. And we have a look at 30 years on, his niece has suffered the same fate. So if you have a look at the purpose of the Royal Commission is to implement those things to ensure that our people are safe. And failure to implement those recommendations is leaving our people like our mum still die today. So 30 years on from the Royal Commission, we now have close to 500 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that have died in custody, with a huge number of 10 that has passed within this year. Out of those numbers, there has not been one police officer, prison guard, or health professional that has been held responsible or prosecuted for an Aboriginal death in custody. And we currently have 2 police officers that are on trial and a prison guard that's on trial for the death and shooting of Aboriginal people. Our family acknowledges that the Victorian government for taking a long overdue stance on this past due recommendation, and we look forward to their commitment to replace it with a public health response. Our families campaign has emphasised the importance of family-led advocacy and the advocacy with the community that has rallied behind families like ours. It's powerful and it's imperative that families with the lived experience at the centre of their own calls for justice, because at the end of the day, we do know what we need and what it feels like to lose someone in those horrific circumstances, and what our community needs and the necessary steps that we need to take. We just need those around us to be able to support us and to amplify our voices. So awards like this are really important to recognise our hard work, because we are still trying to navigate through a system that wasn't actually built to support us and keep us safe. We're also just trying to heal and grieve from really horrific circumstances like a death in custody. And it's essential for our families and our grassroots community members to be acknowledged in these similar ways, because we are carrying a huge burden and load while we're trying to heal from ongoing colonial violence. And it is a reason why I had established the Dhadjowa Foundation, which is a grassroots national organisation that is not government funded. It is completely independent to ensure that there is no influence from the governments as to what calls for justice and action that we call for. And the organisation is solely there to support families like myself and the other families that are on the board, and to ensure that they have all the necessary tools while they're on this ongoing journey and their fight for justice. So it's really important that we have things like this out there, because it makes our story known and it helps our allies support other families that are coming after us. So thank you again, and please continue to support families like mine and share their stories and donate to their fundraisers, because every bit is deeply appreciated, and it is truly that support that has let us get to times like this. And we know that without the public sharing our stories, you know, the majority of the time they aren't going to reach mainstream media outlets. So it is really important that our families' voices are amplified, and that, you know, these are the conversations and the truth telling that you have within your own home, that you have within your family spaces and your friends, and really calling out the bias and injustices that First Nations people are experiencing. I think it's important to be raising our kids with the truth telling as to what's actually happening within this country, to ensure that, you know, no one else suffers fate similar to what my mum and other Aboriginal people have. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Apryl, and thanks very much for being here and accepting the award on behalf of your siblings. The work that you have done and that your family's done, and other families who've been affected by deaths in custody, has been enormous in very difficult circumstances, and we acknowledge how incredible that work has been, and that work is going to change and save people's lives. So thank you so much for being here. And I encourage everyone as well to have a look at the website of the Dhadjowa Foundation and donate if they can to help support the amazing work that Apryl and other families are doing. Thanks very much, Apryl. Should unmute myself? I knew that would happen at one point. I'll turn now to introduce the Empty Chair Award. The Empty Chair Award was established in 2016, and it's an award that's presented to a person who is worthy to receive the Voltaire or the Young Voltaire Human Rights Award, but they cannot be present to receive the award in person due to the consequences of their exercise of advocacy for human rights, free speech or civil liberties. This year, Liberty Victoria is awarding the 2021 Liberty Victoria Empty Chair Award to all refugees and asylum seekers in on and offshore detention. There are a number of individual refugees and asylum seekers in detention who were nominated for the 2021 Empty Chair Award. And in recognition of the human rights work that a number of people in detention have been doing over the years, Liberty Victoria decided to award the Empty Chair Award to all refugees and asylum seekers in detention. The group and individuals who are in that circumstance have fought to defend freedom and to articulate their experiences and the injustices that they have suffered in detention and in the system that Australia has really put in place for refugees and asylum seekers. They've shown moral leadership, political resistance, and they've worked together in protests from remote islands, hotel prisons, immigration detention facilities, and more recently for those who've been released by taking the extraordinarily brave step of speaking out in front of the buildings where they were previously detained. Australian immigration detention policies and practices have meant that refugees and asylum seekers who fled persecution and torture in their own countries continue to be dehumanised and detained, having to wait years for their claims to be determined. The ongoing and indefinite detention of asylum seekers and refugees is a fundamental breach of refugee and asylum seekers' human rights and not in accordance with Australia's international obligations. I'd like to acknowledge today that I understand from Papua New Guinea we have Halal Udin, who's also known as Spicy, tuning in. He is also a person who has sought asylum from Australia in 2013, and he was imprisoned in the Manus Island Detention Centre. He's currently in the Bomana prison in PNG, even though a court actually granted him residency in PNG. When the PNG government decided to appeal that decision, he was imprisoned again, and he's now awaiting the outcome of that decision. Grace, who is present, she's going to share a couple of links for Spicy's story, and I encourage you all to read that as well. And thank you, Spicy, for tuning in today from where you are. On behalf of refugees and asylum seekers in on and offshore detention, the award tonight will be accepted by Mostafa Azimitabar and Craig Foster, both of whom we'll hear from tonight. I'll just give a brief introduction and then I'll hand over to Moz and Craig. So Mostafa Azimitabar, who's also known as Moz, was incarcerated by the Australian government on Manus Island and more recently in the Mandurah Hotel and Park Hotel in Melbourne, despite being a recognised refugee. During this time, he exhibited an outstanding commitment to raising his voice for human rights and advocating for other refugees publicly and visibly at a great risk to himself. He's played a significant role in raising the profile of refugee rights in Australia, empowered other refugees to tell their stories, and contributed to change the public narrative, as well as the eventual release of hundreds of medevac refugees in Australia. We also have Craig Foster, who's present tonight. Craig is a former Socceroo and a former SBS presenter who's currently the Adjunct Professor of Sport and Social Responsibility at Torrens University. Craig Foster came to prominence in the human rights arena for his leadership in relation to Hakeem Al-Arabi, who was a Bahraini footballer that had been granted refugee status by Australia in 2017. Hakeem was detained in a Thai prison when he travelled to Thailand for his honeymoon, and he faced possible extradition to Bahrain, where he likely would have faced torture and possibly death. Craig was part of the advocacy campaign, a successful advocacy campaign to obtain the release of Hakeem from a Thai prison, which enabled him to return to Australia. In 2019, Craig travelled to Port Moresby to meet with refugees and asylum seekers still detained in Papua New Guinea and Nauru to bring attention to their flight. Craig has continued to be a strong advocate of refugees and asylum seekers and has continued to campaign strongly on their behalf, highlighting the cruel government policies and laws that affect asylum seekers and refugees. Please join me in welcoming both Moz and Craig this evening. I'll hand over to Moz first.
Thanks, Julia. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land of which we stand today. I would like to pay my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, elders past, present, and emerging. Also, I would like to thank Auntie Georgina for welcoming me and other refugees to your beautiful land. Everyone in Australia must respect to all Aboriginal people, and I believe that everything that people have achieved in their life is because the kindness of Aboriginal people. Thank you very much for gave me this opportunity to speak now. My name is Mustafa Azimitabar. I am a refugee who was locked up in detention for 2,737 days by the Australian government for no crime. Unfortunately, part of the refugees who were with me are still in detention in offshore and onshore. They are still suffering behind the tinted glass and fences. They don't have hope. They do hunger strike because they want to see people that pay attention to them. No one can hear them. They are very hopeless these days. After nearly 3,000 days, the Australian government don't want to stop torturing these innocent human beings. I got my freedom on 21st of January 2021 with the help of many wonderful people in Australia. But still, these refugees are locked up. And the silence of the opposition party, that is Labour Party, is a green light to the Australian government. Sadly, torturing innocent people, torturing minorities, torturing vulnerable people is going to be like a legislation in Australia. And the Labour Party is stamping this legislation with their silence. I want to say that how long these innocent people should be locked up in jail. In the other way, many people in the sector of advocacy are giving false information to the society, and some of them don't do it deliberately. For example, when we call these places like hotel, we give hope to the government because this place was a hotel. This place, like the park and the Mantra prisons, were hotel before when we were locked up. and the Australian government are controlling all the narratives, and they are playing game with innocent refugees. And the truth is that refugees are human beings. They have hope, they have dreams, fears, like you people outside the prisons. And I really want to thank you amazing people who are always thinking of these innocent people. And also want to tell something that if we see that these governments are torturing me and other refugees for more than 8 years, is because they have a cruel system and they are protecting each other. But who do we have? You know, we need to create a system for our advocacy. Unfortunately, the opposition party is ignoring us, is ignoring our advocacy, because they are a part of they started this game and they don't want to be involved. Sometimes they say some words, and most of the time they are blind and dumb. I hope this meeting put pressure on all of the politicians who are silent against this cruelty, and I believe that they enable crime against humanity with their silence. Human rights should be beyond the politics. Unfortunately, these human beings behind the tinted glass are dying because of politics of these politicians, because they want to achieve votes, and they do whatever they can to achieve votes. And the Australian government also have spent more than $12 billion with your taxes. People in Australia are paying tax, and the Australian government are using the taxes for torturing these innocent human beings. For like 20 years, refugees are being accused of throwing their children in the ocean. They call refugees bad people, terrorists, illiterate. Before, they targeted different parts of the society, like Vietnamese and Lebanese. Each time they target a part of the society. And I believe that as long as we are not together, we cannot defeat this government. When we get together, I believe we can destroy this government. If we want to, and we need to crumble down this tinted glass with our unity. If we see that these buildings are used as prisons and also fences, detention centers, it's because they are using the taxes of people for torturing a part of the society. And I want all of you people get together and put the organizations, all the organizations should be get together, and we need to make a system for our advocacy. Otherwise, these the Australian government continue their torture against this innocent, for these innocent people. Thank you very much, everyone. And I hope this award to these innocent refugees can make a noise, and hopefully we see all of them get their freedom, because they are here for medical treatment and they haven't received any proper treatment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Moz. What you said is completely correct. The way that we are treating refugees and asylum seekers is shameful, and the way that you've been treated is shameful. What you said was human rights should be beyond politics, and that's exactly right, that this is about people's lives, and we do have to band together to help people who are in awful circumstances like the one that you were in. So thank you very much, Moz, for sharing your story and for being here.
Thank you, Julia.
Tonight.
Just one thing. When I received my visa, the time when I got my freedom, I was so happy. And when I went to my friend's house, they didn't give me any accommodation or any financial support. They said, just go and find somewhere. This is what the Australian government told me. And when I got home and I read the paper, it is mentioned that the holder of this visa is not entitled to study and get a qualification. And this is how they are discriminating refugees with other parts of the society. If I am not allowed to study, then I have to just be like second or third class citizens. But I like to study, I like to help people, and I want to be a part of this society. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Moz. I'll hand over briefly to Craig Foster now.
Yes, thank you, Julia, and Moz, for those very accurate, very honest, and very stirring words. As always, my good friend. Thank you, Julia, for and to Liberty Victoria for what you've done this evening, giving a presentation of this Empty Chair Award to all those refugees, both offshore and in Nauru, over 100 still stranded in PNG, and of course around 140 or so Medivac refugees still locked up 24 hours a day here in Australia. So important to acknowledge the bravery that they've all shown, and I was speaking to Moz this afternoon about courage and bravery, and saying, what is it? How do we characterize it? How do we define real courage? Well, it takes, firstly, incredible courage to flee one's land, to strike out with no certainty whatsoever as to how you or your family is going to be able to create a new life or even survive. It takes, I can't even begin to imagine the level of incredibly strong human spirit to survive, to be still there after 8 years locked up in so many of these institutions under Australia's very cruel policy. I want to acknowledge Auntie Georgina as well, and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation of the land I'm sitting on at the moment here in Sydney. I want to congratulate Mohamed, Semra and Apryl for their awards also. Acknowledge Spicy in Bamana. It's an incredibly horrific story, one of thousands. And I noticed that there is a link about Spicy's story, please. I know we've got 74 or so people on here, so probably 65 or so attendees. Please read up on Spicy and raise your voice, because it's just shocking what's occurred there. 2,737 days, Moz said, and yet he, like so many of them, were prepared despite the fear mongering, despite the mistreatment of guards, despite the systemic pressure not to expose this cruel regime. People like Moz and so many others inside have been incredibly strong to raise their voice. I'm talking, and in particular, sending all my love and support to Ismail and Don Khan and Kasura at the Park Hotel in Melbourne, to Jalal in Baita, to Abbas and Hajar, Magyarmas up in Darwin. Of course, we had 3 families there until very recently. 2 are now gone, and just 1 family is remaining with I can't say dwindling hope, because how can one have hope when they not only have been detained, incarcerated against their basic human rights for over 8 years, as you all know. 8 year was the anniversary last Monday or so, or the one before that 2 weeks ago, roughly, on the 19th of July, 2013 to 2021. What a disgusting period in our history this is. Shameful, something that will never live down, something that has bled into our national psyche, this privatised system of cruelty that's cost us, as Moz said, around or more than 12 billion Australian dollars, $800 million alone this year for just several hundred people offshore. Staggering waste of money, staggering gouging by private companies on the public purse, you and my taxpayer money. For any Australians who may be listening or either live or later, at some point you have to consider the disgraceful waste of public money at a time when our universities are becoming more expensive, our public school system is being progressively defunded, the ABC funding is under pressure. Here in Sydney we pay to drive on roads, and even Medicare is under pressure. And yet these people have the most basic of human rights, that is to flee for safety. And among all of the community of nations around the world, Australia stands as one of the most torturous policies on the planet. It's extraordinary, the place where we've allowed ourselves to get. And we have done that because every Australian, myself included, have a deep responsibility to speak up on all of these social issues. And this goes to the very heart of the essence of who we are as a nation, who we are as people. There's a hunger strike going on right now in Maita. Many of you will know. Please raise your voice for those brave, courageous men who've suffered so much already and are simply saying we will not take anything any longer. And Australia needs to understand our plight. Can you imagine just for a moment having to make the ultimate sacrifice to decide not to give your own body sustenance simply in order to make a protest? These hunger strikes are things that we've historically seen all around the world. And yet here it is right in the heart of Melbourne, right in the heart of one of our most global, international and proud cities. It's extraordinary. All of this for recent years has been going on offshore and therefore to some degree was out of sight, out of mind, and Australians could perhaps clear their conscience by believing that it wasn't here. That's changed now. Now you have hundreds of people who are here. You have tens of thousands on temporary and bridging visas with no certainty for them or their children. And we've somehow managed to get ourselves and our country into a disgusting position when it comes to asylum seekers and refugees. To Moz's point, and just quickly, I know that you're running slightly over time, for everyone, and particularly journalists, media and others, it's so important not to regurgitate propaganda. It does, I see every day, from well-meaning Australians saying to me and regurgitating the propaganda, the language, the insanity and the lies that have been propagated about refugees over at least the last decade. It hurts, it works, and it has to be pushed back against. And of course, we're seeing that now also with COVID and climate action and other areas. Finally, I might just say that we all have a responsibility to raise our voices, yes, but to do so in the most effective way. And that requires unity. Across the refugee sector, there are, I don't know how many organisations there are, frankly. There may be several hundred, but there's certainly 150. And the aggregate of the amount of people who support all of those organisations must be in the several hundred thousands, if not 300,000 to 400,000 Australians. Those 300,000 to 400,000 and those 200 organisations must come together and raise one voice. To the degree that the refugee sector is disunited, to the degree that the refugee sector has more hashtags, has more campaigns, have more diversity or disunity, refugees suffer. That is the reality. There's only one obligation for all of us to get the almost 400 people out to be able to sing on the stage at Town Hall in Sydney, as Moz did several weeks ago, or to indeed take any stage in their life that they would desire. And that is that we must unite in the maximum numbers possible to put maximum leverage on the Australian government and opposition now and heading into the next election. This cannot go on. And we all have a responsibility to acknowledge that for all the well-meaning for all of us, we are playing a part in an awful, tragic play here, and we have to change our roles. We must be effective. And advocacy means being effective. It doesn't mean just raising voices and raising placards. So please, to the refugee sector, there is no alternative. You must unite, you must have one voice, and you must get everyone out. Thank you to Liberty Victoria. Moz, all my love as always, and to everyone who's still locked up, we never give up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Craig. What you said about us need to unite, I think that they're really powerful words, and I think that it is the refugee and asylum seeker space is one where I think it's very difficult to maintain any hope because of how atrocious the policies are that are in place. But people like you, people like Moz, and people like the ones you've named who are in detention, who've been speaking out, continue to do that work. And it's fundamental and important work. And I encourage everyone to get together and to advocate as one voice in respect of those people in custody. So thank you very much, Craig, and thank you very much, Moz, as well. What we have in a second is a Q&A with Craig, with Moz, with Mohamed, and with Apryl. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's a little Q&A box, which is different from the chat box, but there's a Q&A box there where you can enter your questions, and I'll be doing my best to MC the questions and ask our panelists what you've put in there. Just before we start that, as I've said earlier tonight, I really thank you for being here and for donating your time, and also for people who've donated money to help support the ongoing work of Liberty Victoria. And if you are able to continue to support us and you're able to click on that donate button in the email that has gone out, we would really appreciate that as well. Now, I'll start off with Apryl. Apryl, as you said, and I think I mistakenly said it was 40 years, but 30 years since the Royal Commission to Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. That Royal Commission really gave us a roadmap and recommendations about how to stop or prevent Aboriginal deaths in custody. But as you said, since that time, we've had almost 500 people pass away in custody. And you've tragically had that first-hand experience with the system and with how the system deals with individuals and families who have been affected by a death in custody. What do you think are the biggest roadblocks in the way for governments to implement the recommendations of the Royal Commission?
I think it's the fact that they choose to ignore the systemic racism within the institutions. For example, within Mum's case, the Victoria Police played a huge part in her death, and things like the coronial system isn't actually supportive of seeking the right justice and accountability that families require. We had seen during Mum's coronial inquest that there's not a lot of truth telling. There is no truth telling in coronial inquests. There's a lot of deflecting and there's a lot of I do not recall. But from the interactions that they had with Mum, where they had arrested her for public drunkenness, and she was removed off that train within 60 seconds of the interaction with the train conductor. They have arrested her and they have put her in a police cell, didn't monitor her effectively, and she's fallen multiple times. And one of those falls cause a traumatic brain bleed, causing her to die. But immediately after they had taken her to that police station, they had actually picked up a white woman that was arrested for public drunkenness as well. But the difference was she wasn't asleep. She was actually verbally abusive to everyone that was at the Cumberland Hotel. And instead, they had picked her up and they had taken her home safely, and they didn't even actually give her a fine. So they had chose a community police approach where with mum, she was racially profiled and she was put in a police cell for her own safety, but they didn't actually monitor her effectively. So during that coronial inquest, the coroner had actually failed to find racism and the way that they interacted with mum. And we see that a lot of the time during coronial inquests is that they don't actually pinpoint the racism within that's caused our loved ones' deaths. And they don't even highlight how inadequate the investigations are and the complete police bias when they have a police officer investigating their own. Because you have a coroner and then underneath that you have the police investigator. So if you are highlighting their failures, you're also highlighting your own failures. And I feel like that's similar to the governments not able to recognise the failures that are continuing to happen because of them not implementing the recommendations. And there's a lot of blame between the state and federal, where if they had actually implemented the recommendations 30 years ago, the majority of deaths that have been caused wouldn't have actually happened, mums being one of those. Like there are multiple deaths that are linked directly to the recommendations. And it's a continuous struggle for families to get that acknowledgement and to get them to get the truth out of the coronial inquest. But then to actually have someone prosecuted and convicted for that is next to impossible because the systems aren't established and set up to get the justice for Aboriginal people. You know, like the police, since invasion, has been perpetrating that colonial violence. So it has been an ongoing struggle. And until the governments are willing to actually hold institutions like police, prisons, even the health sector to account, deaths will continue if they aren't going to hold those people accountable and if they're not going to implement those recommendations.
Thanks so much, Apryl. What can we do to help people who have been affected by deaths in custody? What can we as individuals or as a community do to be an ally and to help those who've been affected by tragedies?
I think speaking just from experience, as what I found had really helped us was the community approach, in a sense of that wraparound love and support. It may not seem like a big deal to some of just attending the coronial inquest, but it is actually huge. For us as a family to see people that now we've actually formed really strong lifelong friendships with just solely because they were supporting us during our most difficult time is, you know, something that's really special. And it's important for the media and for the police and for the other people that are responsible for these deaths to see that there is that public support, because it does keep the pressure on. And sharing the stories on social media is really important because, like I said earlier, mainstream media don't actually report on our deaths, and they don't report on them correctly, and they victim blame. A lot of the deaths haven't actually been shared. There may be one article and then it gets left. People don't even know what's actually happening. They don't know when the coronial is going to happen. So actually physically being there and showing up, signing petitions, donating to their family campaigns and GoFundMes so they can continue to campaign and go to the coronial inquest. And also people that have actually got skills to donate their time for that, whether it's like, you know, they've got campaigning skills, if it's graphic design, like every little part makes a difference when you're trying to campaign for something that is extremely difficult, like an abolition of the law that's extremely overdue. But like I said too, just sharing the stories, speaking about it in your own homes, and having that conversation with people so we don't have to. Like, we shouldn't have to be doing the labor all the time trying to explain why our lives matter and why we shouldn't be dying at the hands of police every week. It's really important that allies share that burden with us. So, like, we don't need to be constantly displaying our trauma to be able to, you know, make it sound like we should be treated with basic human rights within our own country.
Thanks so much, Apryl. They're really important and inspiring words, and I hope that everyone who's present tonight takes you up on those things as well, and helps out in whatever little way they can. Mohamed, I'll just turn to you briefly. You started Endeavour Youth Australia to train future leaders, and you've been very active in the human rights space, including last year during the hard lockdown of the Flemington and North Melbourne towers, where you helped residents. For someone of your age and your generation, what are some of the biggest human rights issues do you think that there are, and what can we do to help advocate for those issues?
I would have to say, for someone my position, I'm speaking from lived experience and through the I guess like lens of like the area I live in and what I've seen and like the things I've been exposed to. I would say racism and discrimination. And I'd like to reiterate what Apryl was saying on systemic institutionalized racism. And I feel like it's important that we understand that it's a systemic issue, and systemic issues need a systemic solution, right? It needs to attack the institution. I feel like one thing that Apryl taught me, right? It gave me, I guess, a formula, I would say, to my activism, right? So when we were denied entry to the Apple store, it was clearly because of the color of our skin. We recorded it, posted it, it went worldwide, and we ended up getting an apology from Tim Cook, the CEO, but also what he did afterwards is what really surprised me. So he ordered all the staff around the world to be retrained in customer inclusion and diversity. So that's when I realized that it's easy, right, to go and I guess like be in the school and speak to teachers, but there's 100 schools in Victoria, right? And you can't reach everybody. But I feel like once you tackle the institution and you put things in place for that generational change and like that rippling effect, I guess that's when it's the most effective. So one thing that we're trying to do with Endeavour Youth Australia is, I guess, try and build that environment where discussions can be had. And it's not easy to speak about racism. People get defensive, but addressing it is the important thing. When I was growing up, it was very hard to speak about racism. Every time I brought it up, I was the one that was getting punished. I was the one that's getting sent to the office, or, Mohamed, you don't know what you're talking about. So the most important thing is that we have that discussion, we talk about it, acknowledge it, and then try and put things in place. So through Endeavour Youth Australia, we're trying to change the narrative. And that's why when I look at young people from the community, especially what was happening in North Melbourne and Flemington, right? The amount of initiative that was shown for young people inspired me, right? And it was one of the main factors in me running for council last year, because I saw the negligence and the lack of cultural awareness from leaders that were meant to, I guess, take us out of like the pandemic, lead us. And one thing that I saw in North Melbourne and Flemington is that lack of like cultural awareness. I was the one, my friends and my community were the ones that were calling people inside the towers, asking them what they wanted, facilitating most of that at the beginning. So what that showed me was, okay, the only way that we're gonna have that actual change is if we're reflected in positions of power. I guess it's very important that leaders are a reflection of the community they're serving. And right now, that doesn't seem to be the case, but that's why we're trying to identify in these young leaders, because there are young people right now that just don't have the opportunity. For instance, when I was younger, a lot of the opportunity wasn't shown to me. I'll give you an example. whenever there was an opportunity to take up a position at the school or outside of school or organization wanted to come and like give people, I guess, opportunities, it was perceived that I didn't want to succeed. Oh, we're not going to share Mohamed because he might not even want to do it. Like, that's why that decision shouldn't be made for me. It should be placed in front of me, and then, okay, I should be able to decide whether I want to take it on board or not. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to offer as much support and opportunity to young people, and that's give them the support they need to succeed. And that's when we start establishing those that diversity in leadership, and that's when we can start seeing the Australia we all want to see. Yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thanks. Thank you, Mohamed. I'll just quickly ask Moz and Craig. This is really building upon what both of you said in your speeches, but I guess there's two questions. One is, what can we do practically to help individuals or to help groups of people who are currently suffering under the policies, and what can we do more generally to really, well, try to change the current harsh policies that are in place?
Thank you very much, Julia. It's a very important question. It's, I think, less than 1 year to the election, and both parties are using the innocent people in the detention for their votes. Some people, some politicians in Labour Party decides not to say anything at the moment, and Liberal Party is continuing and blaming Labour Party that they are taking them to Papua New Guinea, and they created an offshore detention center. What we can do is to, when the politicians, when the parties don't listen to us, people in the society have to create a system, have to create a campaign all together. If we create, there could be like 10 or 20 campaigns in the sector, but we need to follow and support the highest, the top campaign, and all the sector get united together. When we are together, I am sure not only the Labour Party is speaking, I am sure the Liberal Party will quickly release the refugees in the detention, because when enough people hear the stories of what happened to these innocent people for 8 years, then a wave of change happens. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Moz. So look, Moz, as usual, really said it all there. I think, look, there are 34, 35 people currently locked up in the Park Hotel in Swanston Street, Carlton, in Melbourne. And there are, I would imagine, quite a high number of refugee support organisations right across Melbourne. And I have been many times to those protests, and those protests should be 10 times as large. And every organisation should be there. Every person should be making clear to all of their close supporters, friends, family, and otherwise that this is ongoing. And it cannot be acceptable that people have been detained for 8 years. They're in a hotel right next to the city in Melbourne, and there's a handful of people out the front protesting. I just find that staggering. Okay, anyone who's in the refugee sector has to be there, firstly, and that whole scenario has to be brought to its knees. The only way to do it is either through a public pressure or through the political system. When it comes to the forthcoming election, then more Australians, and there's already enough to mobilise a very significant amount of people, need to make very clear that we all feel that any politician's position when it comes to the ongoing and indefinite detention of innocent refugees is a factor for us in our selection of you. Doesn't matter what your party is. It is a factor for us in our selection of you as part of, as a public representative of our local area. So this issue has to go to the very heart of the nature of Australia and actually, stop being so politicised. In other words, become a human rights issue. And more Australians simply need to say, I'm not voting unless you're going to step forward and add your voice to bring this to an end. So I think the entire sector should be saying to every person who wants to run for public office in the next election, do you or do you not support the ongoing detention of refugees on Australian shore and offshore who've been there for 8 years? And people have to be called out. Everyone has to be. It's the only way that this can be brought to an end. And there is, I'll say again, there are more than enough people who have been supportive of refugees over a very long period of time, who, if brought together en masse at a time when this has gone beyond any dimensions or definitions of inhumanity, to bring this to an end. The only question is, can it happen?
Thank you, Craig. And someone's just put through that the protests are daily outside the Park Hotel in Naarm in Melbourne, 5:30 to 6:30 on weekdays and 3 to 4 p.m. on weekends. One question that's been asked that really is for all the panellists, that in the stories that have been shared tonight, racism and systemic racism is really a common thread that goes through all of the stories, and really meeting and relating to each other as a human being would hopefully be one of the most powerful ways of addressing that systemic racism. What do you, and this is really to everyone, the panelists, what do you encourage those listening tonight to do to help address those systemic issues? Apryl, I might start with you.
I guess firstly, educate yourself as to what's actually happening around you. For example, what happened to Mum, until we had actually spoken about it, no one knew what had happened. And that's not necessarily at the individual's fault. That's happening at whatever state or, town that it's at. But when you are seeing people rally and you are seeing things like petitions and people lobbying, it's for a good reason, and we do need support around that. But if you are staying within your own little bubble because you're not actually affected by racism, then that's just leaving us to have to fight and deal with it on our own. So I think that the best way, one of the ways and starting way, is actually educating yourself and seeing within your own capacity what you can do to help those people that are affected by it. I know it is for with Mum and deaths in custody in general, it's very traumatic, and it can be very difficult whether you've experienced it yourself or not. And it can take a lot to be able to support a family that's going through that. So if you are trying to look after your mental health and that's not something that you can do, like I said, sharing the stories and showing up, writing to your public council and your politicians, and we've been calling out for the Prime Minister to meet with the families that have experienced a death in custody to talk about the demands that we put forward. And for example, some of them are things like implementing the recommendations. So just doing whatever you can within your own capacity to address those things. And I think educating yourself is the best start at doing that.
Thanks very much, Apryl. Mohamed, did you have any thoughts in respect to that? You're on mute, Mohamed.
I was on mute here. I would have to agree with Apryl. I think the most important thing is allyship. As a young African, there's not a lot I can do on my own, right? I'm not in control of any institutions. I don't have any power per se. All I have is my voice and my stories. And if that's amplified by allies in positions of power, like this, like Liberty Victoria right now, giving me the platform to, I guess, speak on my lived experience, trying to, I guess, create that cultural awareness, then I guess that's the most important thing, because there's a lot of things that 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 cultural and linguistic diverse people bring to Australian society. Refugees, I'm a refugee myself. My family was in a camp before arriving here. I was too young to remember, but like all that lived experience, all that drive, I think can be utilized to make Australia a better place. But it's all about having platforms that are, I guess, controlled by us, right? Because I feel like now a lot of the platforms and a lot of the things that I guess young people right now are using don't necessarily have that type of like ownership or like say over, and it's very easy to get taken away. So I guess it's about giving young people a voice, giving the multicultural nation a voice, and identifying and investing in them.
Thanks, Mohamed. And we've had people also pop into the chat the website for the Dhadjowa Foundation, as well as the fundraising for the foundation, and also for Endeavour Youth Australia. So I encourage everyone to look at those websites and to help support those excellent causes. Craig and Moz, what were your thoughts in respect of that issue?
Craig, you talk first. So, I didn't get the voice of Mohamed the last minutes. If you speak, Craig.
Yeah, so I would say that for people in my position, and that is as a white Anglo-Australian, is definitely to educate ourselves, to open our eyes, firstly, to acknowledge that, you know, colonisation, racism was at the heart of that, and that we've never dealt with it, to have enough courage to listen without responding emotionally, and learn, read, and, you know, there's plenty of work out there. You know, there's films and there's books, whatever it is that you like. There's a tremendous amount of material. You know, we've had the Black Lives Matter movement recently in America, and I do think it's been profoundly important because it has coined phrases like silence is violence. And it's for the first time, I think, really got through to the psyche of non-people of color, if you like, that we are responsible for the system that we've helped build and that we rely on for what we have, you know, for whatever it is that we do in life, and the privilege that we have, the privilege to walk down the street and not be racially profiled like Mohamed, the privilege I have to, you know, not incredibly sadly, you know, have family members put into the situation that Apryl has had. And to recognise that that is, you know, entirely about race. If we're talking about refugees here and Mustafa and Mohamed, we have to recognise that if it was, you know, people fleeing, white people from South Africa, then they wouldn't be interned for 8 years on Manus Island or Nauru or elsewhere, as you know, the former Home Affairs Minister made very clear in recent years. If people were fleeing from Britain, you know, who were white, if people who are fleeing who weren't Muslim, or they're not Sudanese, or they're not of colour, they would not be locked up over this period of time. It's just a simple fact. And as a country, we need to wrestle with that. We need to deal with it and get to the very heart. I might just finally finish by saying that the only way we can do that is go back to move forward. And that is go back to colonisation, get to the truth of what occurred. And it's so wonderful that that's starting to come out. You know, reconcile ourselves. First Nations have nothing to reconcile, but we have to reconcile with the history of our own country. Look at what I believe the Uluru Statement is, the expression of the right of Indigenous Australia to self-determination under the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples globally. For them to First Nations people to have absolute centrality in decision making regarding their own culture, their people, and political decisions made in their regard. And I cannot for the life of me see why that seems to be such a difficult discussion in Australia. It's long overdue, and it certainly, we have to say, is time.
Thank you, Craig. I just, one thing I want to add is when I arrived to Australia, Aboriginal people came and welcomed me to this land. Lydia Thorpe and her family and some other Aboriginal people came and welcomed me, and I felt they were like my family. Actually, they are. And also, if we link all these groups together, all the nations together, we become one, like a family. Then we understand our pain. Then we understand the meaning of torture correctly. If someone is in detention, it doesn't make sense when we are, this country is imprisoning children in detention. Like if look at the 65% of Aboriginal children, like the people who are like the children go to detention, 65% of them are Aboriginal, and they want to show the other parts of society, look, this is Aboriginal people, they are taking this. But that is completely wrong. It's because they are a part of this government is creating fear to the nation, that they want to show that Aboriginal people are stealing things, they are bad. But the truth is that they are driving fear to the nation, and definitely there is no crime, definitely they are innocent, and they just send fear to the nation. If anyone don't respect to the Aboriginal people, they were criminals. People who came to Australia, the white people who came to Australia were criminals. Aboriginal people let them come to this land, and they are putting their children in detention. It's horrible. I hope that a gladiator come to this land and put all the liberal members to the 5-star hotels and lock them for 8 years, so that they feel how other parts of society feeling for what they did to innocent people. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Moz, and thanks, Craig, as well. We've run a little bit over time, so I'm sorry about that, but I think everyone will agree that it was very worthwhile to have that little bit of extra time to hear from all of our panelists. And thank you again for sharing your time and your experiences. There's a number of links that have gone up in the chat for different organisations and different ways, as both Craig and Apryl have said, to educate ourselves. And I encourage everyone to take up the call to what all of our panellists have said here, to help make a difference, hopefully, and to help improve human rights in and around Australia. Thank you so much to everyone who's been here tonight. Thank you so much to our Apryl, to Craig, to Mohamed, and to Moz for being here tonight and sharing their time. Thank you also very much to Auntie Georgina Nicholson for that excellent welcome to country that we had the privilege of hearing earlier on. Thanks, of course, not only for being here to our panellists, but also for the work that they've done in advocating for human rights and continuing the fight for human rights. I think that we've all learned a lot in listening to you tonight, and in how to help address some of these issues and help take up the calls that you've made. This seminar or webinar, it has been recorded, and we'll be putting it up on our YouTube page a little bit later. I'll also try to put in some of the links that we've had up with there, so that people can look up the different organisations that people have been involved in. Thanks again to everyone for joining us tonight. It's been a real privilege to have you all here. We're living in a bit of a strange world at the moment with the COVID-19 pandemic. And normally we would love to be here with you in person, but that can't be possible. We hope that everyone stays safe, and for those who are in lockdown, we hope that that ends swiftly and quickly and safely for you as well. And hopefully we can see everyone in person at next year's Voltaire Human Rights Dinner. If you haven't done so, and if you could, as we said earlier, there's some links as well about donations to Liberty Victoria, if you're able to contribute. Thanks again to Mohamed, Semra, to Apryl Day on behalf of her siblings, the children of Tanya Day, to Moz and to Craig for being here tonight. And thanks also to our volunteers who helped make tonight possible, who are very busy behind the scenes. So thanks very much to Grace Girardi, to Andrew Rawson, Sally Ann Bra, Jill Russell, Tom Clark, Adam Pulford, Thomas Kane, Martin Radzak and Sam Norton for all of your help in making tonight possible. Thanks everyone. That closes the event. Hopefully see everyone soon in person.